February 7th, 1943, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh pulls his F4U Corsair into a steep climbing turn at 14,000 feet. Behind the long nose of the aircraft, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine growls with 2,000 horsepower, driving a massive 17-foot propeller through humid Pacific air. Below him, four Mitsubishi A6M-0 fighters cut across the sky in perfect formation, flown by veterans of China, the Philippines, and the Solomons. They are confident, disciplined, and deadly. Walsh had been flying the Corsair for only 3 weeks. The Zero pilots spot him. They break formation with practiced precision, splitting into pairs and beginning the familiar spiral climb that had doomed so many Allied pilots. It was a tactic perfected over 18 months of dominance, the deadly dance that made the Zero the most feared fighter in the Pacific. But this time the enemy was different. Walsh shoves his throttle forward. The Corsair surges ahead, 300 knots, 320, 340. The massive aircraft accelerates with a force that would have ripped a Zero apart. He dives in. A burst from 650 caliber Browning machine guns tears through the first Zero. Flames, smoke. The Japanese fighter spirals into the jungle below. Walsh pulls up, reverses, and dives again. Another burst, another Zero disintegrates. Within 3 minutes, the sky is his. 4 Zeros, destroyed or fleeing. As Walsh limps back to Henderson Field, fuel nearly gone and bullet holes in his wings, one thought burns in his mind. For 18 months, the Japanese A6M-0 ruled the skies of the Pacific. From the Philippines to Malaya, from Burma to the Dutch East Indies, Allied pilots faced an enemy that seemed untouchable, a machine that could outclimb, outturn, and outfly anything they could put in the air. It wasn't just an airplane, it was a myth, a weapon that carried the aura of invincibility. Reports from survivors all said the same thing. Don't dogfight a Zero, you will lose. The Zero's origins began in 1937 when Japan's Naval Air Staff issued a demand that seemed impossible. Build a carrier-based fighter that can fly 1,000 miles, climb to 20,000 feet in 8 minutes, and outmaneuver every aircraft on Earth. At Mitsubishi, chief designer Jiro Horikoshi accepted the challenge. His answer was elegant and merciless. He stripped away everything that wasn't essential to flight. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no heavy structure. The result was an aircraft so light that ground crews were warned not to lean on its wings. Its heart, the Nakajima Sake engine, produced just under 1,000 horsepower. But combined with the Zero's ultralight airframe, it created a machine of terrifying agility. Empty, it weighed barely 4,000 pounds, less than half the mass of an American F4F Wildcat. It could climb faster, turn tighter, and fly farther than anything the Allies had. And in the hands of Japan's elite naval aviators, men trained since the mid-1930s, with 800 flight hours and real combat experience over China, it became unstoppable. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, these pilots flew in flawless formation, executing combat maneuvers they'd rehearsed for years. American pilots, many barely out of flight school, never stood a chance. Across the Pacific, the pattern repeated. In the Philippines, Malaya, and Burma, Allied air forces were annihilated, often before their aircraft ever left the ground. Kill ratios reached 10-to-1 in Japan's favor, and every victory reinforced the same belief, that the Zero and the men who flew it were unbeatable. By early 1942, Allied pilots had learned one rule: never turn with a Zero. Their aircraft, the Brewster Buffalo and the Grumman F4F Wildcat, were outclassed in every way that mattered. The Zero could outclimb them, outmaneuver them, and run them down over distances of 1,000 miles. In those first months after Pearl Harbor, it seemed as if Japan had discovered a new law of flight, one that America couldn't break. But deep in Connecticut, at the Vought Aircraft company, engineers were already working on something that would rewrite the math of aerial combat. The project had begun years earlier. February 1st, 1938, when the U.S. Navy Bureau of Aeronautics issued a new fighter specification. It didn't ask for a plane that could turn tighter or fly lighter. It asked for one thing: maximum speed and climb rate, above all else. No compromises, no elegance, just raw power. Rex Beasel, Vought's chief designer made a radical choice. He built the fighter around an engine, the most powerful one on Earth at the time, the Pratt & Whitney XR2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder monster producing 2,000 horsepower. To harness that power, the plane needed an enormous 13-foot, 4-inch propeller, the largest ever fitted to a fighter. But that created a problem. How to keep the propeller from striking the carrier deck during takeoff. Beissel's solution became iconic, the inverted gull wing. It lowered the landing gear mount point while keeping the gear short and strong enough for carrier use. It looked strange, even awkward, but it worked. When the prototype F4U took to the air on May 29, 1940, it shattered expectations. It hit 405 miles per hour, faster than any fighter in the world. It could climb to 20,000 feet in under 7 minutes and dive faster than any aircraft the Navy had ever tested. The test pilot, Lyman A. Bullard Jr., said it plainly, "This airplane doesn't fly, it attacks." But there were problems, dangerous ones. The Corsair's long nose made forward visibility nearly impossible during landings. The landing gear bounced violently on carrier decks, and the left wing would suddenly drop in stalls. Carrier pilots called it the ensign eliminator. So the Navy hesitated, but the Marine Corps didn't. In October 1942, Marine squadrons on land bases in the Solomon Islands became the first to receive the new F4U Corsairs. They didn't care if it was ugly. They didn't care if it was hard to land. They needed something that could kill Zeros, and the Corsair could do exactly that. The F4U Corsair entered combat not from the decks of carriers, but from rough airstrips carved out of jungle and coral. The Navy called it too dangerous for carriers. The Marines called it just right for war. In early 1943, squadrons like VMF 214, commanded by Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, began flying the Corsair over the Solomon Islands. The pilots were veterans, men who had fought in Wildcats, survived the Zero's wrath, and understood exactly what they were up against. They knew one thing above all: you don't beat a Zero by playing its game. The Zero could still outturn any American fighter. It could still climb like a homesick angel. But the Corsair changed the fight's geometry. The Corsair weighed nearly 14,000 pounds fully loaded, more than double the Zero's combat weight. Its 2,000 horsepower engine gave it speed and acceleration no Japanese aircraft could match. It carried 650 caliber Browning machine guns, each with 400 rounds, 20,400 total. It was armored, self-sealing, and built to take punishment. A Zero could dance, a Corsair could kill. February 1943, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh meets 4 Zeros head-on. In 3 minutes, he shoots down 2, cripples another, and drives the 4th into retreat. He doesn't outturn them. He doesn't outclimb them. He simply outpowers them. This wasn't luck. It was physics. Japanese pilots were still flying machines designed for 1940. Fragile, lightly built, optimized for agility. But the war had changed. Air combat was no longer about who could turn tighter. It was about who could strike first and climb away faster. In the hands of American pilots who adapted to new boom and zoom tactics, the Corsair was unstoppable. It would dive on Zeros from altitude, hit hard with concentrated bursts, and climb back out of range before the Japanese could respond. By the summer of 1943, kill ratios began to swing dramatically. Marine squadrons flying Corsairs achieved 11-1 victories against the once untouchable Zeros. The legend of the invincible Japanese fighter began to unravel. In one report, a Japanese pilot wrote, "Their new plane climbs like a rocket and dives like a falling star. We cannot match its speed." The Corsair, once rejected as too wild for the Navy, was now rewriting the rules of the Pacific Air War, and it was just getting started.